Hi and welcome. The following is a conversation with Dr. Peter Hughes. He is a philosopher, a psychologist, a co-founder of a digital marketing agency, and he's a writer. We will talk about how to start writing, what are the useful habits, what is the process, what are the pitfalls, and of course, what are the tools to utilize in this process. Without further ado, please welcome Dr. Peter Hughes. So boom, we are online. Peter, thank you today for taking time, and welcome to this call. We will be talking about writing today, about the purpose of writing, about the process, the tools and habits, and so on. But before we go into that, maybe could you briefly introduce yourself to the audience in terms of background, your current activities, and so on?
Yeah, thanks, Ilya. Thank you very much indeed for inviting me on this call. I'm by training a philosopher and a psychologist. I'm also an entrepreneur, and I'm also a writer of a number of books, both ghosted books, non-fiction biographies, and history. So, or a combination of history, philosophy, and psychology. So, and I've been published by a number of different publishing houses. So I combine my time between a full-time working life and also a pretty much full-time writing life as well.
Yeah, that was one of the exciting moments which I wanted to discuss, but like just starting a little bit before, for the beginning, like how did your wish to write books emerge?
I think ever since I can remember, I've been writing. I wrote what I would loosely call a book, certainly 70 or 80 pages of text, which was the beginnings of some kind of story when I was maybe 12 or 13. And so I've always been writing. I've obviously written a lot of work for different businesses. I've written articles for different publications, ranging from the New Statesman to Quillette to the Spectator, and for me, writing has always been a passion because it's something that I feel that is both mentally stimulating and enjoyable. It's a way of grappling with things that matter to you in life, and leaning on all those people who have preceded you, the millions of people who've written novels, stories, histories, psychology books, philosophy books, the company really of strangers, which of course is why I love being surrounded by physical books as opposed to digital books, because they're like sentinels, standing over my study, and at any point I can move backwards and forwards in time and engage with people long dead. So my desire to write really is as old as I am. Really, I've always been writing.
Before we started the recording, you actually brought a very good point that reading is easy. Yeah, you can even like not really read for comprehension, but just you go through the book, and then you cannot even like say in one paragraph what is the book about. Yeah, but writing is extremely complicated if you want to take all this knowledge and put it on paper. So we could say like the writing is also for structuring your thoughts, for getting to the point, for being a bit more precise in your language. Yeah, so it's also for personal development.
It is, but above all, writing is a job, and this is what people get wrong. People who want to be writers think they have to wait for a moment of inspiration, or they write something great because the muse descends and they think they're the best writer ever. Then they go for 3 or 4 days and they can't sit down at their desk anymore because they don't feel inspired, and then everything drifts. Writing above all is a job. It's a discipline. And what makes it hard is people assume it's something almost quasi-mystical. There's a wonderful, probably one of the greatest novels ever written by an English novelist called George Eliot. Her real name was Mary Ann Evans, and she published under the name of a man because she was writing in 19th century England. And there's a character in that book, a sort of a rather incompetent classicist called Casaubon, who is courting the heroine of the book, Dorothea. And Dorothea, who is actually much more intelligent and sophisticated than he is, but because she is younger than him, imagines he is some sort of genius because he's always reading the classics. He's always researching about Greece and Rome and all this wonderful stuff about which she knows little. but he's always reading, preparing. And eventually the great moment comes where he actually puts it down. But what he writes turns out to be poor and derivative, and he's got a much more of a bloated sense of his own ability and his own self-importance. He turns out to be a completely inadequate writer and an inadequate historian and classicist. And what that book shows really is writing, we should just get on and do it. As soon as, and the way to do it really is to be extraordinarily disciplined and to be prepared to write. Sorry, Ilya, go on.
No, just yeah, I'll ask the follow-up.
Go on and be prepared to write rubbish, because nothing comes from nothing. So the skill to writing is to sit down at your desk for long enough until you can write. I don't believe in writer's block. There is no such thing as writer's block. There's simply not sitting at your desk long enough to solve whatever problem you want to solve. And once you write, say you set yourself a target, which is what I do, of maybe 5,000 words a week. That can seem very daunting because you think, how am I going to write 5,000 words a week? But just write it. Now, therefore, in about 12 to 13 weeks, in about 3 months, you've got a book. You've got a book length work of writing. Now, then you're like a master craftsman who's carved it. Imagine a big block of marble, and you've made some initial chips and you've bashed a bit off here and you've bashed a bit off there. You've now got the basic body of the book. Then you just go through and you refine it and you refine it and you refine it. And you should always resist the temptation to go back and refine the first chapter indefinitely. Oh, it's not quite right. I'll do it again. I'll do it again. I'll do it again. Because if you write well, as the book evolves, say you're writing a work of fiction, the characters will tell you where the book needs to go. And the characters will also tell you, as you look back, the mistakes you've made and how you need to redraw them. But the key thing is be disciplined and write to a schedule.
This was one of the major points for me, which I took out of our previous discussion. So I actually used it also to write my master thesis. So my character was liabilities, but it was like setting the target to write like a certain number of words or pages and do it until you have your work, and then go over again and refine it, maybe delete some parts, maybe edit some parts or add whatever, yeah. But just really do not get stuck on the first couple of pages and iron them out for 2 weeks until they are kind of perfect.
Yeah.
And speaking about that, so if you have a target, let's say as an order that you received, yeah, we want like an 1,500 words article, then you have this like target in sense of words, yeah. But if the person sits down to write an article or a white paper and there is no real target, like it must be 5 pages, so yeah, how would you set the target then?
Well, let's assume you're writing an article. You're going to be writing an article for something. So the article is either going to be for a publication, or it's going to be for a website, or it's going to be for your own blog. And if you're writing for any of those medium, you're going to have a rough idea of word count. So if you're writing for, I don't know, the New Statesman, and they say we want 1,000 words, well, you're going to write 1,000 words. If you're writing a blog for a website, which is not yours, somebody might say, or for a blog which you don't control, the person who runs the blog will say, I could do with 750 words from you by next Wednesday. You'll always have an idea of word count. And even if you're writing for your own website, you're going to think, okay, I'm going to write 2,000 words on this. And then see how you get on with it. So I think it's always important to understand the number of words you're writing when you're writing an article, and also you work to a deadline. Any article you write should always deadline yourself. Now, when you're writing a book, there might not be a set number of words. You might think like the famous children's book, The Little Prince, that's 15,000 words, but it was originally, I believe, about 45,000 words. And when it's on expiry, he came back and he said, right, what have I got here? He cut it and cut it and cut it and cut it and cut it. But had he not have written that first 45,000 words, this extraordinary story that was buried inside there would never have come to the surface. So, and if you're writing a book, for instance, you don't set a number of words, and set yourself so many hours you're going to work a day. And
but I feel like it makes more sense to like, if you write for, I don't know, medium.com or something, yeah, where you don't really have a limitation on the length, then you can still go and have a look at articles which resonate with you and tell, okay, they are so many words long, so I would basically try to write an article which is that big. Yeah. And like speaking about the habits, I mean, you are a co-founder of a marketing agency, like 100% job. So how do you combine a writing job with a commercial job, and like in sense of like time schedule and also having enough energy for doing both?
Well, I work as a consultant, and that's what I do, and I consult on all full time on all sorts of issues to do with digital marketing. Particularly, I'm interested in using EEG and various different research methods in solving really communication problems and brand problems that the companies face. But yeah, it's full time. But how I go about it, I do. Typically, I've gone through a cycle when I was writing my last book where I would start work at 10 o'clock in the morning and I'd work till about maybe 5, 6 o'clock at night. I would then take a short break to go to the gym, to go for a walk. At some point between 10 in the morning and when I started writing, which typically was 8:30, 9 o'clock at night, I'd try and get 20 minutes, half an hour nap, so I could then just recharge my batteries. I would then write from 8 or 9 o'clock until 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. Then I'd go to bed. I'd get up again at 10 and the cycle would do it. And I'd do that 5 days a week. And on weekends, I would also work Saturday and Sunday. And I did that for months and months and months. And part of the reason was on that book, I was up against a deadline. And when you're working for a publisher, the deadline isn't going to move. They need the book to go to press at a certain date. So you've got to produce it. You can't be sloppy about it. And how you do it is extraordinary discipline, really. And you just do it. And that's what separates those really who will publish a book from those who don't, because not a lot of people have that discipline. I'll give another example of that. A guy who wrote a very famous book called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. He also had a full-time job, and he would also go through a similar cycle, where he would work during the day, then he'd try and get a bit of sleep, then he'd write into the night. And Henry Miller, the famous novelist, he always recommended people get a job that takes little out of them, which he did, and so he could keep the bulk of his psychological energy for writing. But it all comes down to two things. One is self-discipline, but the second, how badly do you want to do it?
And so here I have a very, I think, very important question, because there are so many topics out there. So you might get, if you're an expert in a certain field, you might get an inquiry to write an article on a particular topic, which is cool because somebody have already given you a topic, and if you accept it, then you can just write an article for that or write a book. But if you, as a writer, maybe a blog post writer or article writer, if you don't have this inquiry, you need to decide yourself, okay, out of all these 100 ideas I have, this would be the thing which I will describe or write about. So how do people do that? How do you prioritize?
They just make a decision, because if you imagine, it's not just whether you're writing an article or whether you're writing a book. If you're writing an article, there are 1,000 articles you could write. And exactly as you say, so the decision is there for what matters to you, what really matters to you, right? Now, you could say, well, that doesn't help, because all the 1,000 things that I want to write about, they all matter to me. So therefore, it becomes just choose one. You have to make the decision to write. And this is why writing is so much harder than reading. Reading, you can research a bit of this and a bit of that, and you can form your ideas here, and you can make notes on this, that, and the other. But when you're making a writing, it's an act of commitment. It's saying, I am going to write this. And in doing that, you are excluding, say, my fictitious 1,000 things you could write about, 999 of them, you're just saying, okay, I'm going to park those. And you have to have the courage to do that, even though there's a voice at the back of your head saying, oh, yes, but I really should be talking about this over here. You can't talk about everything. So when you write an article, just focus on that article. And ignore everything else, write it. And then when you've finished it and you're happy with it and you've posted it, or either on your own blog or you've sent it to whatever other blog or website or publication you're writing it for, then move on to the next one. The key thing is make a choice, make the commitment, make the leap of faith if you want, and just write.
So we have already like figured out writer's block does not exist, but there is another like the quality question. Yeah, so you write something and you're like yeah, how do you judge whether the quality of what I have written is like good enough so that I can put it out there into the world? I will not be embarrassed, and even more, people will like it. So how do you cope with this challenge?
Well, I ignore the last two things that you said. I mean, because what stops a lot of people is a fear of embarrassment. Am I going to make a complete fool of myself? Are people going to think, well, he's not very smart, or she's not very smart, or how could she possibly write this, or how could he possibly write that? That's quite a difficult thing sometimes for people to overcome, is that fear, the fear of being judged, which goes to the second point, which you should completely ignore, which is whether people will like it or not. All you have control over is what you write. Now, you can write something and it can be thrown stillborn into the world, right? That nobody likes it. It's absolute rubbish. And the amount of writers, from Dostoevsky to Nietzsche to all these great writers who have been ridiculed, who have failed to publish anything significant during their lives, you know, who or at least for a good chunk of their lives, you know, who have been demonized for what they write, who've been imprisoned for what they write. You know, I mean, there's the history of writing is full of writers whose work has gone unappreciated. I mean, perhaps one of the classic examples of that is the Confederacy of Dunces, where the writer was so distraught by the fact of his book had been rejected and regarded badly that he killed himself, and it eventually went on to become a Pulitzer Prize winning novel. You know, so you know, we have to ignore whether people like it. You can, if you as a writer care at all whether people will like or will not like your book, and that is your primary driver or your article, you'll never write, and you should never write. You've just got to write what you think is important, and then people will judge it. If they like it, then great. If they don't, well, that's also great.
Yeah, I think you also mentioned like Harry Potter, yeah, which was originally, it was not like very famous and so on, and only because of the daughter of the publisher, it became so famous. And
I think she was rejected. She was rejected a number of times. That story might, I'm not sure the exact dynamics of it. What I do know is the publisher, I think it was Bloomsbury, I think it was the niece or the daughter of one of the editors, said, yes, look, this is a really great book, you know, you're to, and a father or uncle, whoever it was, said, okay, that's fine, and we'll do it. And I think J.K. Rowling was given £2,500 advance on the proviso that children's books don't make any money. And of course, she's gone on to be, if she's not a billionaire, she's pretty close to it, and one of the most lucrative and extraordinary writers, really, writing stories of all time. But she didn't write to become a billionaire. She wrote because she had something to say. She wrote because she had a story to tell. She described once, I think she was in a train, and she's Harry Potter, she was all in her mind, and she's had a vision like of a boy in front of her, and that's Harry Potter. She imagined him walking down the train. That's who he is. I know who he is now. And so she wrote because she had something to write, and she coped very well with rejection. She got rejected, but she kept sending the manuscript off. And again, I mentioned Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. He got rejected the thick end of 150 times before his book became a seminal work and sold millions of copies. Stephen King, before he got his first book published, I think it was Carrie, used to put all his rejection slips on a pin in the garage. He'd keep them there. Rejection, 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 rejection. And that's the other thing as a writer, you've got to learn to love rejection. You have to learn to love it. And you have to be indifferent to particularly in the age of social media. People will say terrible things about you. Some people will think you're great, and other people will think you're the worst thing ever, and people will misread you, and they'll say things that don't really express either what you wrote or what you intended to write. You can't live your life being concerned about what other people think. By all means, you can choose to take criticism, constructive criticism on board and learn from it, but you can't write with the idea of praise or approval at the front of your mind. You can't.
I know quite a few like really good specialists in their area. Like for example, I don't know, business development specialists.
Yeah.
Yeah, they are really good in what they are doing. And I was always asking myself, I would love to have from that particular guy, I would love to have like at least even 30 pages of him dumping his knowledge into a text in a more structured way. Of course, yeah, he would like spend some hours thinking about it. Yeah, but many people, even if they are very good in their job, they are like, when you talk about writing a book, yeah, writing an article doesn't seem to be very complicated, but writing a book means like, oh my god, I'm not a writer, it's so complicated, it's like way far away from what I'm doing. Yeah, so can we talk a little bit maybe about if you have an idea, you have written some text and so on, how do you get that one to a published book or to a published ebook?
Yeah, I mean that's a, a great question, and I'll start with what you said there. People say, "Well, I'm not a writer," but what's a writer? What is a
Yeah,
writer? What's a writer? I
yeah,
mean, everybody's
exactly.
a writer. If you write a tweet, you're a writer. If you write an article, you're a writer. If you write a blog, you're a writer. I mean, what is a writer? There's this, we imbue the idea of being a writer with almost a quasi transcendent or spiritual quality, which of course is likely to destroy people's confidence, but also is likely to break their spirit of adventure and curiosity, which are essential for a writer. If you ask yourself, never mind whether I'm a writer or not, we're not going to put writers on pedestals. It's just a job, and it's something I do. And I'm interested in how this idea connects to that, and let me just explore it. So if you go into it with a spirit of adventure and curiosity, you won't get overwhelmed by the idea you're not quite a writer. And I think it's important to not commoditize what a writer is. Well, in a way, yes, to commoditize it. It's a job, to turn it into a profession, just like any other. And I think that's the key to it.
And how do you get like a file, so to say, yeah, like a manuscript, a text? How do you get it to a published book? So what are the exact steps? Whom do you reach out to? Do you need to pay somebody or vice versa? Or, yeah.
Well, it helps enormously these days if you have an agent. There are many publishers who won't look at a manuscript or an idea unless it's proposed by an agent. And so I think getting a literary agent is important. Another way of doing it, of course, is for those people who have big social profiles. That can itself be a real driver for a publisher. So they can sit down and say, well, this person's got a high profile. Or a publisher might think this is just a great idea. This is just a great idea for a book, and I'm going to give it a go. But getting an agent, I think, is fundamental to the process, and also, having an understanding of being able to present a book and your ideas very succinctly. You're not going to. I've known people send like 500-page manuscripts cold, either to agents or to publishers, and well, they're not going to read that. So what you need to do is, this is the idea for my book. Here's a summary. This is the potential market for it. These are other books in that market. This is how it might sell. And here's the first chapter or a sample chapter.
Okay, not the full book even.
Sorry, you don't send the full book because they're not going to read it. Because you imagine any editor at a publishing house is going to have, God knows how many manuscripts sent in by agents every week. What they want is something that's succinct, that they can access immediately, that they don't have to spend too much time over, that they can make a quick judgment on. And of course, doing it that way, they're going to miss a lot of great books, but also they're going to find that also they're going to be able to process so many books doing that way. They're going to find a great book when it arrives. And I think that the key thing about it is to understand, if you want to do it professionally, when you're presenting it to an agent, or when your agent's presenting it to a publisher, why this book? Why is this book important? Where's the market for it? How is it going to sell? Because most books don't sell that many copies, but every publishers after that book, like 50 Shades of Grey, I don't know if you remember that, all those years, which was a badly written book, but at one point, I think in the UK, 1 in 3 books being sold was 50 Shades of Grey. It was a publishing phenomenon. And every publisher's looking for that book that tips. and very few of them do. And there are writers that will write book after book after book, and nothing much happens, and suddenly something tips.
And we are talking about the path, I suppose, yeah, where you have the script, but the publisher is paying for printing that and for bringing it out and so on, yeah. So it's not like you would like pay for printing it somewhere and distributing it in the entire world.
Yeah? When you get published professionally, if you get an agent, the agent submits it to a publisher. The publisher then will say yes, we're going to take it or not, and you'll be assigned an editor. You'll work in conjunction with an editor, because this is the other thing that people don't realize. When you're a writer as such, writing is a collective endeavor. You know, not only do you stand on the shoulders of all those writers in the past whose work you have learned from, borrowed, stolen, whatever it is you've done with those ideas, you've taken them and incorporated them into your own work. You also then rely on good editors and good collaborators to help you refine your own ideas and find the gaps in it. Because when you write something, you're going to miss stuff because you've got a perspective and a voice and an argument that you want to make. Say it's a non-fiction book. But an editor would say, well, actually, I don't think that stacks up. Or have you read this article here? Maybe this might be a good route to go down with this. They'll also check the book for, as well as for any legal implications. In other words, are you likely to get sued? They're also going to check it for historical accuracy, for instance, factual accuracy. So if it's a history book, it'll be historical accuracy. If it's a book on science, it'll be scientific accuracy. And then, of course, you'll also be assigned a proofreader who will go through the book and make sure all the spelling, etc., is correct. And then you'll also have somebody who does the indexing for you. You don't do that yourself. They'll go through and they'll create the index at the back of the book for you.
Okay.
But now, of course, you can self-publish. There are plenty of platforms you can publish your own book, and there are people who have made, significant and substantial generated significant and substantial revenue by self-publishing, because you can now publish your own book. You can typeset your own book. You can launch it on Amazon. You can publicize it through your own social platforms and through wherever you can gain publicity to do so. So there's, you don't have to go through an orthodox publisher anymore because people have their own platforms.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, you can self-publish. But yeah, so and this is a great shortcut. Like if you're confident that you can market your result. Yeah. But now maybe back to writing. Maybe we can talk about like real tools. So what do you use for writing? So maybe you can share the screen and show a little bit.
Well, I can show you something. What I do is I use something a piece of software called Scrivener to write from, but also I use to make notes in. Which I find it invaluable. I just use Evernote. Let me just put that screen up here, and you can see here. This, for instance, is my Evernote, and you'll see on the left-hand side there's a number of notebooks. There's notes in progress. I've categorized them: anthropology, art, biography, brain science, business and marketing, classics, etc., etc., etc. And how I do the notes is, you can see it here. This is a book by Scott Atran called In God's We Trust, and you'll see that I make quick notes. I paginate the notes, and here I've divided into general notes. There's some metaphors that I find interesting, and then here I've got quotes. Occasionally, I will also do, I don't know if I can find one here. If I go into history, I can, or maybe philosophy here, I can look at Hannah Arendt, the Jewish writings. Here, again, very short notes on one of the articles from Hannah Arendt's Jewish writings. I've put the quotes quickly in red, and everything else in the basic notes in blue. But again, you can see the notes are not, comprehensive in the sense that who is to blame for everything? Jews and the bicyclists, why, etc. Page 47. So for me, that's just a quick prompt. If I want to find the full context of that, I'll turn to page 47 in Hannah Arendt's Jewish writings, and I'll pick up that piece. So when I'm writing something, I will then, let's assume I'm writing something here. We look at Michel Foucault, and I have 3 of Foucault's books here, and I want to, let's look at his history of madness. And I might think, okay, I want to write something about Foucault's history of madness, and I want to look at an article he's written in language counter memory practice. I'll maybe cut and I'll paste both these notes, and then I'll put them into Scrivener, and then I'll work within Scrivener after that. So it's a very efficient way of working because, and sometimes my notes, let me see, I can show you some of them. I do them so quickly, they're incredibly truncated. So I think this might be one here. So if we look at Fernando Cervantes' book on the Conquistador, which I used in my last book, you can see how short these, are. I and F, change of heart, that's Isabella and Ferdinand. And C titles, that's Columbus. So I'm making notes so quickly that I'm just using them as prompts because, again, I'm writing to a deadline. So I haven't got the luxury of being able to spend, day after day making each one of these notes absolutely perfect, long form sentences, proper paragraphs. Sometimes like this, they're just quick prompts for me to go back to the book, which I'll have on my desk. And I can then refer to the book and I can see if I want to use that or not.
I think like if you would give yourself like a year to write an article, this article will fill this year.
Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, and that's, I think, a really brilliant point because shall I unshare my screen now?
Maybe the Scrivener would be also interesting.
So this is Scrivener, which is and here is, so for instance, here is a list of chapters. How I do it, I've structured it by chapters on the left hand side here. And then on here is all the notes. So if we want to look at the notes I've used for the Emperor Nero, you can see I've done notes from Tacitus. I've done notes. Who else have we got here? Tacitus, and here we've got Suetonius, and those are two books that I've obviously used. And I've got all the pages marked. And again, I've got those books on my desk because I'm writing this, so I can go back to those notes. It also works with this. It's great because you can have corkboards like this where you can move stuff around, and so it acts like a virtual corkboard. And again, on the right hand side here, you can see you can make notes here. I've just got a simple note: statues, battleground, river, identity, and just quick prompts for me there. And Scrivener is a great piece of kit. It was actually developed by a guy who wanted to write a book, and he thought, I'll develop a piece of software to help me write it. But unfortunately he couldn't he never wrote his book, I don't think, but he created this absolutely brilliant piece of software. So I think that you've got to use tools like Evernote, like Scrivener to help you write, and I recommend Scrivener very, very highly.
Yeah, I think for those who have never seen this piece of software, what for me, so like when you write with Microsoft Word, you have like a very limited way of restructuring material, browsing through the material, and Scrivener has like a really, really substantial set of features to be able to nest the individual chapters and so on, then move them around, have them visualized, resort them, make snapshots of these chapters, make footnotes, make notes, which will not go into the output document, and you can always export it into Word or PDF or HTML or whatever, and you can also organize it in a way that it has like all the metadata, front pages, and so on around, and then you have the content, you have your research separately. So I was totally fascinated by.
No, it is. You're absolutely right, Ilya. It's a great, and it's a proper writer's tool. Word isn't really a writer's tool, because if you imagine trying to do that in Word, you'd have about 30 documents open, or you'd have one document open which you wouldn't be able to search, and there'd be nowhere for you to put your notes, and you wouldn't have a corkboard, and you wouldn't be able to structure it properly as a book, and it's just not. It's a very clumsy. I find Word very clumsy as a writer. I like you said, I'll export the final version of an article. I've written an article or a book. I'll export it into Word, and I might then make some last minute tweaks or something. If I reread it and I'll think, I'll just make some spell checks or the odd word sentence here. I might alter that in Word. But the workhorse really is Scrivener. It's just a super piece of kit. And I don't use it. I probably use 20% of its functionality. I mean, I just use what I need to get the work done. I mean, it's an extraordinarily powerful and evolving tool, and I recommend it. I think it's the best tool for any writer, whether you're writing an article, whether you're writing a book, whether you're writing a white paper. I think it's super. And of course, you can always have links. You can make notes. You can have links to other articles that you need to refer to if you for your research. All that can all be incorporated within Scrivener, and it's very intuitively and easily accessible.
Yeah. So what I figured out in the meantime that so if you write any kind of research paper, so you need citations. So and Scrivener doesn't have a citation manager built in, but you can use like plenty of other citation managers which are out there. And I know that it integrates very well with EndNote, which is a bit pricey. But I think you can also integrate with Zotero, which is for free, and you only pay for storage. Basically online, yeah. And they also have this very wonderful Chrome plugins. So whenever you browse Amazon or any other bookstore online, you can basically click on this browser plugin, and it will add this book into your library. I mean, like as a quote, like for referencing, yeah, for citing it.
Yeah.
Which was like, oh, wow, okay.
Yeah. No, it's great. I mean, and I think it's important really that writers do embrace technology like this. But I know a lot of writers, I mean, particularly fiction writers, actually, I know who will start, either they'll write their whole book longhand, or they'll start writing longhand before then going on to writing on a MacBook or whatever, you know, or a Mac, so whatever they write on. So, and some people do prefer the act of physical writing because it's kind of more grounding, and I can understand that. I don't do that myself, but I can understand the appeal of it.
You have mentioned a service which is called JSTOR, I think, yeah?
Yeah, well, that's just a repository really of academic articles. I use that, and there's others like Academia, and there's many of them, you know, and where you can just, you know, access, you know, huge amounts of millions of academic articles. And
does it have any particular focus in the sense?
No, you can do anything.
Science,
science, non-science, yeah, whatever it is you're looking for, you can you can access. And of course, there are different websites and that may specialize in science or in history, and they'll have their own, you know, many articles that they've published and their own database of articles. And you know, even something like the London Review of Books, you know, I'm a member of that, and I have access to their database, their back catalogue of all the editions of that, if I want to look back over that. So, you know, again, the problem we have is there's so much information out there. We have to be very judicious how we use it, because this is a temptation. Again, we spend all our time writing and researching, and none of our researching and reading, and none of our time writing. And that's the problem. Writing is effortful. It takes effort. It's much harder. Roald Dahl, I think, used to say he'd write for a couple of hours a day, a couple of hours at a stretch, and he'd need a bit of a break, because the mental effort is much harder, say, than physical effort. And J.K. Rowling used to manage maybe, I don't know, 5-6 hours a day, and Dickens did something similar. But most writers, you know, you write in a spurt of concentrated effort, and then you break for a while, and I think that's important. It's very effortful and also very difficult. It's not always pleasant, you know. You're writing stuff and you think, this isn't any good, but I've just got to keep going, you know, and I've got to keep writing. And it's that persistence and perseverance that makes a difference really between those who complete particularly large scale writing projects like a book and those that don't. Yeah.
But they say the same as like I've done quite many videos which are not in public access because these were like internal trainings and so on. And I like filming that. You know, if you want to make a short video, you spend a lot of time on that, and you record like takes, and so like maybe you say a paragraph and then you know it's not good. You say it again, and then you need to cut it and all that. So it's pretty exhausting.
Yeah, it is, and I think that you know, when it's a bit like, I mean, I remember that you know, and this is why you need support, because I remember reading about Stephen King, and he writes apparently 10 pages a day. Extraordinary output. I mean, the man's a genius, and I mean, an incredible output, but that's his task. I think you just write those pages. I think Graham Greene, I think it was 2 pages a day. I can't remember, but different writers have different amounts of output. You just turn the stuff out. But then to turn it into something good, of course, it is time consuming, because you can turn out, 80,000 words in say, 10, 12, 13 weeks. But then comes the job of turning that into something that works. And the problem most writers is they don't then spend enough time just working on that text. Or they look back and they get disheartened because, they think that it's not as good as they thought it was, and people will hate it. And they start getting worried about what this imaginary public perception of their output will be. Well, the first thing you've got to do, you've just got to cut through that, get it out of your head, and just finish what you're doing, and be disciplined enough to do that, and I think that's the hallmark of those certainly who can publish, a number of books, as opposed to somebody who'll never really get past an article.
Yeah, for sure. And so what I take from our conversations is, like, first of all, it's about discipline. It's like, you really have to sit down on a regular basis. You set the goal and a target of a particular number of words, trying to turn research and reading into some meaningful output. So as a opposite to like reading and then getting retired and dying and never getting to a book. And also like finding your rhythm and maybe also your tools to do that in an efficient way.
Yeah, absolutely correct. That's a really great summary, and I absolutely agree with that. And also it takes courage, just and it takes, you have to have a thick skin, being completely indifferent to what actual people may or may not say about your book, and more importantly, these imaginary people, the imaginary critic that we carry in our heads. Just putting those voices away, they don't matter really. I mentioned Middlemarch earlier, of course, the great Victorian novel Middlemarch. I mean, that's what, 700-800 pages of Victorian prose, and these days, with our brains being and our reading behaviors being dramatically altered by a continual, pull of social media and our attention being pulled in so many different directions, our focus being destroyed, is that the idea that people could actually focus and concentrate on large pieces of work, and people's willingness to do so will, of course, of necessity decrease over time. And which, when you imagine, I think I'm correct in saying this, when Amazon and their Kindle books, they will only, I think, charge people for how much of the book that they read. So, which of course, from a writer's point of view, is a catastrophe, because, people buy books and they may read them, they may not, but they still get paid their royalties because somebody's bought the book. But when they buy it on Kindle and say, well, if you only read 2 pages, then, or if you never read a page, then you only pay for what you read. And,
it's an interesting subscription, yeah.
And I don't know quite how that works, but I think that people imagine they write and they're going to be a bestseller. Well, chances are they're not. So that's why it's important you write, really, just to enrich your own life and to enrich the lives of anybody who comes into contact with that book. And that's why you write, because the chances are you're not going to make a living doing it, because very rarely is somebody who sells a multi-million bestseller. It's most writers, like most artists, like most actors, anybody in a creative profession, they don't earn a huge amount of money from it. But those that do, and though they just keep writing, they keep painting, they keep acting, they keep performing. You just keep going, and don't allow the inner voices to destroy your own will to express yourself in a way that you choose to do so.
I think consistency is one of the major topics also, like today, Nicole. Yeah. Hey, thank you so much for these insights. It also inspired me in the past, and right now as well. Again, I learned quite some stuff. Wish you a good day, and thanks again.
Yeah, and thank you as well, Ilya. And I appreciate the discuss. Always good to talk to you, and I hope we can speak again.